What if your story isn't just nice to share, but your most valuable business asset?
Welcome to Rise to Lead, where unique perspectives redefine leadership.
Welcome to Rise to Lead. Today's guest started a podcast just for fun, and it accidentally turned into a 10-year radio career. She's now a 15-time best-selling author, podcast host, and known as the Book Angel. Angel Tuccy, based in Florida, has done 5,000 plus interviews and built a global community of 60,000 plus podcasters and speakers. And today, she helps entrepreneurs turn their story into visibility, leads, and real business growth without living online 24/7. Angel, welcome to the show.
Oh my gosh, Regina, I am so excited to be here to share with your audience and yeah, to really make an impact with their story and their message.
Yes, and you have some great communities that you've already built. So we definitely also want to hear about that. But let's start at the beginning, Angel. What was the moment that first pulled you into media and storytelling? Because podcasting is also storytelling. And did you ever imagine it would become your career?
Oh my gosh, no, Regina. Right? In high school, I was the one who almost didn't graduate because of my fear of public speaking. I never imagined myself on stage, on camera, on radio, any of that. And so I was a late bloomer in that space, in that I started working for a gentleman who was a public speaker while I was in my late 30s. So I'm definitely late to the game. My kids were in middle school at the time. And he was a public speaker and hired me to be his admin. I was just traveling, or not, actually, I wasn't traveling. He was traveling. I was booking his travel. I was all behind the scenes. And somewhere along the way, somebody just suggested we start a podcast. And this was back in, when anybody with a cell phone and an internet connection could start a podcast. And so we did, but rather than just doing it casually, we hired a professional podcaster who had a studio in his home in his basement, and we produced a professional podcast that got discovered by my local radio station. And my first day in the radio studio, no background in journalism, no background, total fear of public speaking. I took my headphones off after that first day in the studio, Regina, and I thought, I found my jam. I can sit here, I can talk, nobody can see me. I didn't have the nerves. It was just me and my producer. And I, day one, hands down, said, this is gonna be it. I'm gonna be one of the top radio show hosts in America. I said that on my very first day of broadcasting in radio. And it was all because we started a podcast for fun.
Wow, that is quite an interesting and impressive story. Wow. I actually found it quite challenging in the beginning to make videos. Even though I had been speaking in public in front of real audiences, because I found it hard to connect with an audience that I didn't see. And
Oh,
that took some time for me to adjust to this.
sure.
Podcast is a bit different. Radio conversation with somebody is also maybe a bit different because you have a conversation. There's still someone there that you see, right? But it's interesting how it works
Yeah.
for everybody.
I have a story about that, Regina. We were in radio, and this is kind of at the beginning of all, when social media was coming online. Everything was traditional radio. But my team was had some foresight and said, "Hey, let's put this on online." And we brought a camera into the studio so people could watch kind of behind the scenes. And then we started kind of playing to the camera and actually speaking, looking at the camera and engaging the camera and when commenting online. So it was a very dynamic turn of events. But I will tell you, the actual studio was not a fan of us hosting online. They're like, if you put it online, they won't listen on the radio. So they were very old school, and then we kind of had to pull them across kicking and screaming. But I'm with you, right? Who do you talk to? So here was my trick, Regina. I just always imagined I was talking to my mom. Because if I could picture my mom, like she's friendly, she was supportive, we had a good dialogue together, and I would just imagine I was talking to her, and that calmed my nerves and made it really easy, just easier to connect via video and radio.
Great trick. So, if any of our listeners are struggling with that, they just pick their favorite person and
Exactly.
they do the same. Yeah. Yeah. Thanks for sharing that. That's great. Now, you said your podcast was something that you started for fun, and that's of course the best way to start. In a way, I did the same. But what exactly happened then? So how did the radio station discover it, and how did that all come about?
Yeah, that was it was one of their one somebody who worked in the station in the studio
Mhm.
somehow discovered the show, the podcast. I think they were probably we were super involved in our community. We were involved with our Chamber of Commerce. So I think they had heard of us through the Chamber of Commerce, found the podcast, and then took it back to the studio. And they brought us in and made us an offer. And here was something interesting, Regina. We never interviewed in the studio. They heard the podcast, and by hearing the episodes of the podcast, that qualified us for this I guess, interview, right, with them. And so we were never in the studio until the day we were live on the studio. I'd never been in a radio studio before. But one of the things that was also really challenging at that time is we were an unknown in radio. Nobody had heard of us. We didn't have any following on radio. And so how do we create that reach and that demand? Because in radio, it's all run by advertising. So advertisers pay for ears, right? For people listening. And we didn't have an audience. So who was going to pay? Who's going to want their commercials ran in this unknown show? So they recommended that we do the morning or the afternoon drive. And in radio, the afternoon drive is like the premier prime spot that you want to be on. It's got the most audience, people coming home from work, scrolling through the dials, listening to the radio. So for me to be giving offered the drive time spot as a brand new person in radio was unheard of. But Regina, I turned it down. I had to turn it down because at the time I had three young ones at home. Two
Oh,
were in middle school, right? And one, actually, all three were in elementary school, and two were getting ready to go into middle school. And I knew if I was in the afternoon spot, I would never be home in the afternoon when my kids got home from school. And that season of life that they were in, I just felt it was really important for me to be present in their lives. And so here was me, only woman, around a boardroom table of all men, old school way we've always done it, offering me the premier spot, right? The dream of a lifetime. And I'm turning it down because I want to be a mom. And Regina, they looked at me and they said, I thought this is what you wanted. I thought your career
mm,
was important to you. Like they made me question, like what was most important to me. But I've known this since then, right? When you follow your heart, you never make a mistake. I knew I would never get that time back with my kids, and that someday, somewhere, like the career would fix itself. But we often feel like we have to choose, right? We have to choose between our family life and our professional life. That I can't have both. And this was that moment for me. I couldn't have both. But here's what happened. They knew we would we would fall on the vine, right? We would die on the vine if we didn't have a listening audience. Because I picked that mid-morning spot. I was going to drop my kids off at school, and then I was going to go in the studio, and I'd be home when they got home from school. And they said, you need an audience. So here's what we're going to do for you. You're going to come in the studio, you'll do your live mid-morning show, and we will replay it in the drive time spot. And they replayed my show for 15 months in the drive
wow.
time spot so that we could build our audience. It was amazing, Regina, and just a validation to just, trust your intuition. It knows the right move for you. And so we had that drive time spot for 15 months. We grew our audience. In the meantime, I was getting booked we would go on other radio shows to collaborate. And so that's where my version now, where I teach people 2 interviews a week. I was doing 2 shows a week on somebody else's radio show to drive traffic back to ours, as well as getting those two spots on during the day.
Wow. So now I'm curious. So what was the theme of the
Of
show?
the show. That was also, right, groundbreaking, innovative in radio because talk radio, and this is talk radio. And this was 18 years ago now when we started this. And so if you listen to AM dial, it's angry men talking about politics or sports, right? They're yelling about politics or they're talking like those are the two primary topics. Our show was a business talk show, and it was a
Okay.
positive business talk show. So here we are trying to push positivity and in small business. We would highlight small business. We talked about the customer experience. We had a show on Fridays. The theme was called Fan Bragging Friday. We trademarked it. People would call in, they would brag about a great customer experience that they had, while traveling, a local mom and pop, even a corporate store. We interviewed small business owners, local business owners in the market, and then when we went national, of course, we were interviewing, businesses all over the country. But we were named by Dave Ramsey and Dr. Ivan Meisner, who is the head of BNI, as the most positive business talk show in America. Of course, we were the
Wow.
only positive business talk show in America, so there was that.
But still. Wow. Yeah, very impressive. And then fast forward, right? At at what point did you stop seeing yourself as someone with now coming to the podcast, right? As someone with a podcast and really start seeing yourself as a true media professional or leader in this space? Or did this happen before? Of course, you had these all this success with the radio show, so you had reason to see yourself as such before already.
It's interesting because I was just going to work, Regina,
Yeah.
and I didn't really see myself in that space until I left broadcasting. And when I left broadcasting, they'd made a change in our studio, a change in the contract. They ended up selling that station that we were on. They didn't have any local talent anymore. So I got out about 9 months before the station was sold. But they got rid of all their local talent, and I went and started traveling as a speaker. Believe it or not, right? The person who was afraid to speak on stage, afraid to be in front of an audience. I was now traveling as a public speaker, teaching entrepreneurs. I would speak at small business conferences and expos and about how to get your message into the media and how powerful being a guest in the media was for your brand, for visibility and reach. And even still, I've been doing that now for 8 years. I left broadcasting 8 years ago, and I've been in this space for 8 years. And so, even as you're introducing me today, right? I run a global network. I've got a podcast. I have this 16-time best-selling author. I'm one of the most booked public speakers in the space that I'm in, and I in that I book over 100 stages a year. So when you say that, I'm like, but this morning I was emptying the dishwasher, I was making a pot of coffee, right? I throw a load of laundry, and like I'm just going to work. So it's interesting when you say, all right, when was the moment? I'm like, any day now,
Right.
it'll sink in.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, awesome. Yes, and I had the pleasure of being on your show, so thanks for that again. That was lots of fun. Let's get practical here because you often talk about leveraging your story. So what does actually mean in practical terms for someone who feels like they don't have a big story?
Mm. I want you to remember this. What you think is ordinary is
Mhm.
magic to somebody else. Because like I said, I was just going to work. I didn't even realize this was a thing, right? And so because we're living it, because we're in it, we don't realize how valuable it is to somebody else to hear the journey you've been on, what you've walked through, the fact that you're still standing, right? That you're still showing up. We all have baggage. We all come through something. We're all going through something currently, right? We're living, right? We're living in this day and age. So the fact that you have an experience, and so if you think about just where you were, right? I call it, location, 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 where you were, where you're at, and where you're going. And this is a really beautiful thing. I remember sitting down and writing down my story when I was starting to become a speaker. And that's when I realized I had had 2,500 broadcasts. I'd interviewed over 5,000 people on my show. I'd actually published at that time, I think well over 10 books. And sometimes you just need to see it in writing. This is where I was, and this is where I'm at. Like these are the things that I'm doing because of what I've learned. Now I'm teaching others how to leverage the same thing. I'm on a mission to create platforms for other people to share their message and their story. Because if more people heard your story, they would be inspired. The world needs your story. They need your light, right? They need your hope. They need to know they're not alone. And you've walked through it. It's not for nothing. But I think the most important piece of it is where are you going? What's your vision? What's your hope? What impact? What's your legacy? Right? And because of that, you've probably created a method for how you get through things, for how you do the things that come so naturally to you. So if we can share your message and your method and your vision in a podcast, in a book, in an article, in a press release, on a stage. And so you've heard the phrase, Regina, an apple a day keeps the doctor away. Have you ever heard that phrase?
Yeah.
We have that. And so I coined a phrase, 2 apples a week creates a visibility streak. So 2 apples a week creates a visibility streak. And the apples is an acronym for the 5 stages and the 5 opportunities that there are. There are journalists, there are podcast hosts. Every day, people are looking for stories, for guests, for inspiration, for entertainment, for education, and you could be the provider of that, leveraging what I call borrowing other people's audiences on these, 2 apples a week. And so the apples is an acronym, APPLE, and then we'll say the S, right? The secret S, right? So apples is articles, podcast interviews as a guest, press releases, which is an incredible credibility and authority builder. Articles are a permanent media asset. L is for live events, and E is for evergreen recordings, videos, online summits. And the S, the secret sauce to all of it, is to be the author, right, who wrote the book on it, because that's the global passport to all of these opportunities. So, did I answer your question? Because I feel like I just kind of went on a whole little
Yeah, yeah, no,
tangent
you
here.
did, you did,
Yeah,
you
good.
did. We were talking about story and how it doesn't always feel big to
Mm.
oneself.
Mhm.
But yeah, absolutely. And it's very interesting to hear about your system or framework. So yeah,
And it was
and
funny how that framework
uh,
came. I have been
yeah.
teaching for
Uh-huh.
years, 2 interviews a week, 2 stages a week, two a week, two a week. And then when my company started offering press releases, well, then I was like, oh, 2 interviews plus a press release, right? Offer be the answer, right? To what it is that you're talking about. And it wasn't until recently that I came up with the Apple acronym. And so now if you look at my LinkedIn profile, I have a little apple next to my name and people ask me, what's the apple for? So I get to tell them about the framework.
Mm. Great trick.
Right,
Curiosity.
when you own your own language and you name things,
Right.
even Regina, we had started the Need a Guest Facebook community back
Mhm.
in 2020, but I can't trademark that because need a guest is a phrase, right? I need a guest,
Mhm.
and which is how it came. People always coming to me saying, I need a guest. So now we've started a new company or a new community where we can trademark the name. And so even the Apple Streak and the framework came from now I'm wanting to own my intellectual property. After a
Mhm.
while, you realize you do have a method, you do have a system, you do have a unique way. It's nothing new under the sun, but the way we do it and how we approach it and what we bring to the table makes it unique. My own story makes it unique. And so Podlicity is now our new community, and I'm trademarking it, but it's the combination of podcasts and publicity, and you've got Podlicity. And so now we're trademarking that. We're using the Apple framework, and which I've always done it, but I never had a name for it. And so I'm super excited about where that's going now.
Absolutely. Yes. And I want to come back to the story and to us not recognizing the greatness or the significance of our story. I was often told in the past myself, Regina, you gotta write this book, because I have a very eclectic background on several different continents. So I just was doing it. I didn't think it was anything special. Of course, it was in a way special to me because I was the shyest kid in town. I grew up in a small village, so and it required courage and and some effort from me in the beginning because I was super shy, right? So talking about speaking, public speaking. Now, but yes, of course, in that sense, yes, but I didn't think in hindsight, I didn't really think it was that special until people told me, you got to write this book. And eventually I did. But I also wanted to find the right focus for it first. And I think that's what also sometimes, is important. Like, how is our story relevant to the listener or to the reader? Because if it's just a story or just a biography without an intention, then that's not the same thing. Would you agree?
Oh, for sure. And I think that we get stuck in that is
Mhm.
that, well, who's going to want to read this? Why would they read this? And that's why I put, we talk about the vision, where you're going and how you're inspiring people and where we're going next. And that
Mhm.
takes it away from this is just about me, but this is now the impact and the ripple that I'm putting out into the world. In fact, Regina, I'm chatting with a gentleman just the other day. He runs an investor program. So he helps people invest in real estate and in the marketplace. But he has a really unique, he carries around, cash. And if he sees somebody who's in a need, he's a big proponent of sharing and giving it away and money flowing. And the way that he does it, he doesn't think is like anything big deal. But he's now shared that with so many people that other people are now carrying cash. So when they see somebody and they want to like reach out and make that impact and pour into somebody else and the generosity. And he's like, what? You're just like, he's like, you're just, right? Like, I just do this. I'm like, but you're changing people's lives. You're changing how people think about money. You're changing how people are now aware of humanity around them and they're looking for places where they can give back and serve like in real moments, not just writing a big check, but actually, in that real moment. So he's now writing a book that we were able to gather enough stories about the impact, the ripple effect that can happen when you're just aware of people around you and their scenario and their situation and how you can step in and sometimes, $20, $50, $100 can change and let that person breathe for a minute. And so it's like a seemingly random something. But I think we
Right.
all have a seemingly what we think is random, ordinary, not that big a deal. But when you start to compound it and realize, well, yeah, I did it here and I did it again and I've impacted and I've served and I've been in like, and even for you, Regina, all the things you're like, there's actually is a pretty cool story there. And there is a direction. There is a direction and a theme to it that I know people want to read on Amazon. The over 10% of all revenue in on Amazon. Amazon sells everything. 10% of their revenue still comes from book sales. People still buy books. Right? Like it's still such a great way for you to connect and share your story. And if you want to be seen as the authority in the space, right? Especially if you're a speaker, an author, a coach, or not an author, an entrepreneur, and you want to elevate against, everybody else who's kind of looks the same and doing the same thing that you do, even real estate investors. I have a rock company. They break rock, right? I have a solar powered CEO. They're writing books that sets them apart. It tells their story, and people want to do business with people. And your
Right.
story makes you human.
Right. And talking about being seen, a lot of people want visibility but don't really want to live online 24/7, right?
I'm
And
one of them.
that is
Me
one of the
too. Right?
ways. Yeah,
Yes.
yeah, absolutely. You want to be with your family, with your friends, with your hobbies, with whatnot. So I, yeah. So how else can we approach this, right? Staying visible without really having to do this.
Yeah. Okay. So I'm gonna put my little sleep mask on and keep this here as a little visual, Regina,
Okay.
because these are things that you can do before you even get out of bed. You don't have to be online. You don't have to have makeup on. You can do these right totally offline. There's three things that you can do to create this visibility. I call it visibility before breakfast. That's my little tagline. We have a visibility blueprint, and these are three things, Regina, that you can do to create visibility before everything, before you wake, before you start scrolling, before you start responding to emails, getting online. Number one, you can spend 10 minutes just what I call writing an article, right? If you think about how powerful online articles, whether on your site and then leveraging, there are online platforms. We have an online digital magazine. We post it out on an online platform. There are online platforms who are looking for contributors. And an article is a permanent asset that goes out online. You can do it right from wherever, like you type out. And so my strategy is take the next 3 to 5 questions that people are Googling or asking searching for before they hire somebody like you or they buy a product like yours. What are the top questions? And then write an article for each of those questions. And you can do that, especially now with AI tools, right? You can get the outline and headline ideas and all of that. So number one, write an article, submit it to an online platform. Number two, schedule podcast interviews. We have the Facebook community, Need a Guest, 45,000 in that. We have another one, the Podcast Network, another 20,000 there. So we have 65,000 people that you can connect with. You can start scheduling. We also have the Podlicity community now in school that you can connect directly with podcast hosts and schedule a podcast interview. And my recommendation is 2 interviews a week. Imagine if you're in front of two audiences, fresh new audience, eager, tuning in for your topic. They come for the topic, but they stay for you. So schedule 2 podcast interviews. So one, write an article, schedule 2 podcast interviews. And number three, and you don't have to do this every day. This is not a daily activity, right? You could do this once or twice a week. You do you. So the third thing is to work on your book, right? Because your story matters, and your story and your book, being the published author, opens up all the opportunities. It is the global passport. And so we have what I call a voice to text method for getting your story out. If you think about a 125-page book, it's about 25,000 words. The average person speaks about 200 words a minute. So if you record a story, an idea, a thought for just 10 minutes and transcribe that over ten recordings, you'll have the manuscript, the foundation to create a manuscript for your next book. And those three things can be game changers for your business. Then you can, get on with your day, go have breakfast, start the scroll, serve your clients, but do three things that are going to create powerful assets to position you as the obvious choice in your industry. And you'll become micro famous, right? 2 apples a week creates a visibility streak. They'll be searching for you. You'll have demand for you by Friday.
Yeah, and I love the tip about the three most Googled or most searched, I should say, topics in your industry or your specialty, right?
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah, so this recording is happening on a Friday, and I happen to actually publish my LinkedIn article. Usually on Fridays, I have a LinkedIn newsletter. So I've already done one of your action steps today. And after this recording, I'm going to record as a guest. So, 2 ticks already done for today.
There you go,
And
right?
talking about also other
I
audiences, right?
On other people's audiences. Yes, if you do your own,
Yeah.
that's not one of the apples. It's being a guest on somebody else's. And so Regina, I love that. Right? People following you. So now you have print with the articles. You're on a site. I think don't sleep on LinkedIn. It is a very powerful place. I think a lot of times we go to the other more fun, social sites, but I think LinkedIn, if you are a professional, that is a definite place you want to make sure that you are leveraging these professional media assets. And so, yeah, you've already got your score for the week. So now you've done it. But 2 per week, like 2 this week, 2 more next week, 2 the following week. That's the cadence. It doesn't have to be overwhelming. You don't have to be online all day, every day, everywhere. 2 per week. That, like, one podcast interview can outshine 300 podcast posts. One article outshine, right? All of that. So these apples that I talk about, the articles, press release, podcast interviews, live events, evergreens, those will, like, they just carry more reach than just constantly on social media to the same people over and over again. Right? I think social media is fun, and I think it's a great way to engage with humans. But I think that media assets, if you want to grow your business leveraging the Apple streak.
Right. And what you described as your framework, right? That's definitely a repeatable way for people to stay top of mind. Uh, it's very comprehensive. So also you don't have to do everything at the same time, but some things can be done quite consistently and quite easily. There are also platforms, as you said, who will receive article contributions. Doesn't even have to be an entire article. Sometimes people look for contributions to an article that they are writing, and that doesn't take too much time usually. So, um, I want to talk a little bit about what entrepreneurs could get wrong when they try to use podcasting or storytelling for visibility, and yeah, and how to fix that.
Well, there's a long list of mistakes, right? But I
Mhm.
think that you could make. But I think the number one is feeling like you can use a podcast interview as an infomercial. I see in my Facebook community all the time, hey, I need to film my event. I need to sell this. I need to get booked on podcasts. And so I think just thinking and positioning yourself as a guest who's there to add value, to educate, entertain, to lift up that community. It's not an infomercial to sell your products. That's what advertising is, right? If you want to sponsor the show, you want to run a commercial, you want to run an ad, that's advertising. So I think that's the biggest thing is that it's not an infomercial. And so then the next thing is, well, then why would I do it? If I can't sell, if I can't monetize, then where's the benefit? And so it's reshifting that mindset that you're creating visibility, you're creating reach, you're elevating your brand, you're positioning yourself as the authority in the space, the obvious voice, the obvious choice. But you do actually want to make sure that it's converting. And so having like a free thing or a way that you can glean, right? People can follow you and connect with you. And the best way to do that is to have something that they opt into. So from a podcast interview, rather than saying, go follow me on socials or, buy my book on that amazing book site, you want to make sure that you're leading them back to your castle. And I live in Orlando, Disney World. We're Disney people, so we think about a castle and think about your business as a castle, and there's a moat around it, and the only way into that castle is through the drawbridge. So you want to have an opt-in, a place where they come into your castle that you can collect. I call it first party data or contact information, an email address or a phone number. So always have a way that people can connect with you, but that you can also then reach back out and follow up with them. So number one, it's not an infomercial. Give great value, elevate and uplift that host and their community, but make sure that you're leading people back to your castle so that they can connect with you in a place that you're going to connect their or gather their email or phone number.
Yes, and then they become a part of your mailing list. You grow your list, and then they actually stay with you, hopefully.
Hopefully, right? Yeah. I mean, if they came in, right, if they
Yeah.
discover you in a podcast, they're going to Google you, they're going to search you out, they're going to look you up. But if you then say, hey, if this was super valuable for you, I have a resource for you, I have an asset that I'm going to give to you for free. And you just, you go here to get it. And having one very clean place and next step. And it should feel like the most organic, natural next step to connect with you. It should not be your calendar, right? You don't want to be filling your calendar all day with just, random conversations. But if they discovered you, then they opted in and now they get an email from you and they check out what you're doing and then they want to book a call. That makes more sense, right? Because now they're more qualified and you're more qualified to have that conversation with them.
Yeah, I think that's an important distinction. So thanks for bringing that up. Now, you've worked with thousands of interviews and authors and guests. Now, what consistently makes someone stand out, in your opinion, in this relatively crowded media space, right?
Yeah, I think what makes people stand out is consistency, right? Consistently showing up repeatedly over and over again on different platforms, and showing up prepared. I mean, having a few stories, having a few talking points, having that URL call to action, having a clean background, good lighting, showing up on time, just like there's a long list of mistakes, there's a long list of what it takes to really show up. But promote other people. If you're a guest on a podcast, listen to it, share it out. If you have an article on somebody else's platform, tell people about it. Don't just be a taker, be a giver. And I think that's what stands out. Podcast hosts, even in media, people who reach out and who are givers and they're helpful. Hey, I have an idea for you. Here's another angle we might not have covered. Here's another thing. Like you be the giver, and that's what gets you booked.
Okay, great. And I have to admit, lighting is sometimes a challenge to me personally. First of all, I travel quite a bit and it's not always ideal. I have this huge ring light here, and even with that, it's not always ideal. And, we do our best. Sometimes it's not
Yeah.
perfect, but we do our best. We adjust as we can. And I think what's really, really important, though, is also the audio
The audio,
quality
yeah, for sure.
because,
Audio is the number one most important thing. Just don't show up in the dark. I've been in
yeah,
hotel rooms, Regina, where I've
yeah,
got the ironing board and I put a lamp and I take the lampshade off and I'm
right.
trying to doing all the things, right? Nobody expects it to be professional studio lighting, but they do, put the light in front of you instead of behind you and try not to be in the dark. But audio, you are so spot on. Audio is the number one. If it doesn't sound good, people won't listen.
Yeah, absolutely. So, for someone listening today who wants to start using their story or their voice more intentionally this week, let's just focus on story actually. What's one simple first step you'd recommend? And I don't want to limit this question to podcasts in this case. So it's really about, it could be a leader leading a team and they want to use their story there, right? So whatever the context is.
Well, and stories are sticky, right? Stories get passed down and so when you think about so often we want to get into teaching mode, right? And we get very teachy, even in our books, in our on stages. It's really easy to want to start like sharing what we know. But if you can tie every education point or every tip back to a story, people will recall it, they'll remember it, and they'll share it. And that's the most important piece. And your story could be as little even as 3 sentences. And again, where I was, where we're at, where we're going. And so even here, I never used to be a good storyteller. I was so afraid to get up on stage, and every time, my paper would shake, my nerves, my butterflies, my mouth would dry up. But I discovered that if it wasn't so much about me, if I could find somebody in the audience or even think about who's my favorite person as I'm speaking to them, then I could relax and it would come out more natural. And what I would end up doing is really connecting with the audience. And I knew it because people would come up and they would share my story, repeat my story back to them. And so I just kind of did here's the where I was, where I'm at, here's where I'm going. And in every answer, you could have a I used to be, and now here, and this is where we're going, kind of reframing when you're standing up in front of an audience, when you're teaching something. If you start with a story, and here's the other thing too, because the where you were part, when you're the person on stage, when you're the person in front, people think you're amazing, and I think we feel like we have to be perfect and have it all together. But telling our story reminds us and the audience we didn't always have this together. I didn't grow up with a silver spoon. I didn't grow up, feeling comfortable on the stage. I didn't grow up with all these, where I'm at now. What you see is this version, but the story also brings the audience and helps them to relate to you that you've struggled, because that's the common denominator for all of us. We've all struggled. The struggle doesn't have to be the same. Struggle is struggle. But you've struggled, you came through it, and now you're doing something with it. So share your struggles, because that's actually where people can connect. But don't keep them there. Bring them out.
Right. And one of the keywords you mentioned just now was relate, right? So it must be in a way relatable or relevant so that the story makes sense to this particular audience. So sometimes it might be a different story that we share. Now, thanks for sharing all of this amazing content today and insights. It's really been such a pleasure speaking with you, and I'm sure everybody has loved it. So where can people connect with all your awesomeness? What's the best
And
place?
I am so glad you asked, right? Because we do have several communities that we can plug you into, whether you're a guest, you want to be a published author, you want to be a speaker. So it's the trifecta of visibility, spot, author, speaker, host. The number one way to get started is go to visibilitybeforebreakfast.com, right? We talked about how you can create visibility before breakfast. Visibilitybeforebreakfast.com. That'll give you access to me, my community, our visibility playbook, and then we'll figure out which lane works best for you, speaker, author, host, or maybe all three.
Amazing. Well, again, thank you so much, Angel, for coming on today with us, for inspiring us to share our stories and more. And to everyone listening, come back next time. There's more awesomeness in store. Your life looks successful on the outside, but doesn't feel right on the inside anymore. If you're done performing and ready to feel fully alive, go to transformyourperformance.com/success now what. If it resonates, we'll take it further together. If you enjoyed this episode, hit subscribe, share it, and join us next time.